Millionaire trader turned inequality whistleblower says the middle class is dead, the elites have rigged the system, collapse is priced in. These are the thoughts of Gary Stevenson. Now, is he right? Is he correct on this? In this video, we'll talk wealth, all the warning signs, and whether redistribution is the solution that can save us. Now, I say Gary is only half right on that. And I do agree, the middle class is slowly eroding. It's not quite dead. I'd say more bleeding out. And yes, I do agree totally that the game is most certainly rigged. The game is rigged to stay up over time. And it's rigged for anyone who decides to participate in this game of building wealth. And yes, of course, collapse is always priced in. It's always been priced in since the inception of the game of wealth. Now, I will say, first and foremost, there's no beef here. And I wanted to do this because, of course, Gary's created such a following and, he's become that kind of people's champion, which is amazing. That's great to see. It's just not the only solution though, okay? And let me say, Gary is very sharp, he's very articulate. And yes, in his own words, he's lived in low-income environment most of his life. I don't know the man personally, and growing up in a working class background and being able to do the things that he's done, make some good money and become a trader, gives him a rare perspective. So, I do respect that, 100%, I respect that. And I do respect a good amount of his views, and I share some of his concerns. It's just his conclusions he draws sometimes, I believe, and the urgency of the collapse that he predicts might need a second look. So in today's video, I'm going to challenge Gary's points, or some of Gary's points, okay? Some of these main points, and I'm going to challenge him constructively. This isn't a teardown at all. This is alternative policy proposals, should we call them. I sound very political right now, but so I'm going to give some food for thought, on how we could potentially achieve more of a, let's say, a sustainable economy, a more inclusive economy, because that's kind of in line with what he's trying to do, and do that without necessarily betting on this huge collapse or even embracing these massive redistributions, because that brings a whole cataclysm of separate issues that can trigger new kinds of uncertainty for the people. So point one, I'm going to call these Gary's claims, okay? And these are not verbatim. These are kind of some of the talking points I picked up from his previous few videos. They've been quite continuity, so it seems to be his kind of main agenda, and he's got a few kind of proposals he likes to push forward. And the main one, the main umbrella, is this wealth inequality, which again, I'm in line with. I understand it's an issue. And he believes, Gary's claim is that wealth inequality is not accidental. It's a result of policy, tax cuts for the rich, financial deregulation, and a refusal to address compounding inequality through redistribution. Now, okay, cool. I like that, all right? I understand it. I understand where it's coming from. And yes, of course, policies have played a huge role. They have. You can't deny that. But just framing them as this, concise choice, like these evil guys in towers, over kind of simplifies both intent and the complexity of the issue. And basically, much of what's happened, like globalization, we should acknowledge the system design, or redesign, should we say, and look at its flaws and inertia, and address those bureaucracies. Don't reverse policy easily. And I agree with him. He did say something recently in regards to, we need to win the argument first, and we need to have not an argument but more of a debate on these solutions and working out the flaws on a micro level. The macro sounds good, but the macro is very hard to do. You don't paint the corners with a roller. Use a fine tip brush. So micro solutions are the key first, and having those debates with like-minded people not just attacking the macro, because the macro is a soundbite. The macro sounds cool. Yes, it grabs headlines and it gets the people behind you, but it's not practical for the people. That's the issue. People cannot act on some of these sound bites. It's just something to get behind. Okay, we understand that policy doesn't get reversed easily. We know this, all right? You don't have to be an economist to know that. But that's just how institutions tend to work, okay? That's why they're institutions, because they've created these spider webs of policy. Now, they're not foolproof. They have chinks in their armor, and it's about finding those chinks in those armors, okay? We need to understand that we need to redesign systems that adapt faster, distribute opportunity much more broadly, and they reward work fairly. Now, Gary's claim number 2 is that the middle class is dying. And yes, the middle class is definitely vanishing. And he says that we're transitioning from asset ownership democracies to elite controlled societies. Without redistribution, the collapse of the middle class is inevitable. And yes, to a degree, he's right. He is definitely right about the pressure on the middle class. And the middle class have a key role in an economy and the regeneration of an economy. But we also have to be careful. We have to be careful not to just romanticize those old school days of the post-World War II middle class as a default, because those days are gone. This is a new world now. It's different out here, okay? It's very, very different. That period was an anomaly when you look at history. The reason it only happened that period of time is because it was an anomaly. That's the distinct definition of an anomaly. It doesn't really happen often, okay? So that period was an anomaly. It was propped up by massive industrial dominance, suppressing globalized competition, and unique demographic factors were all encompassing in that happening at that time. So that really can't be the measuring stick of the middle class, because it only happened in that period of time. Now, a modern middle class will look way different. We're a whole new world right now, okay? No pun intended. Modern middle class will look different. It may not own houses in every generation, but they still can be empowered through access to digital capital. Entrepreneurship needs to be pushed a little bit more, better education, access to education, the right education, and also that financial economic mobility. That's what empowers people, really. So instead of trying to revive those 1960s glory days of the economy, let's just ask, what does the 21st century modern class look like? That's the first question we need to ask. What do we want it to be? And we can't just push for immediate empowerment of redistribution in the form of transfers, because that again brings its own issues. We transfer this wealth to a different class. What's going to happen if that middle class is not stewarded? So Gary's claim number 3, QE and low interest rates enriched the wealthy by inflating asset prices. Governments went into debt while wealth flowed upward to asset holders. Now, this is mostly accurate, okay? But again, let's add nuance to this. Zero interest rates were not a conspiracy to enrich the elite. People of all classes, the lower, the middle, the rich, we all have access to zero interest rates in periods of time. It's what we do with them and how we utilize them. You can't just blame a class of people who are better educated, know what to do with the capital and how to redistribute that capital to attain more wealth. Now, yes, of course, that's an age-old argument in itself. I'm not pinning poor against rich, but the reality is we all have access to that. Now, what we don't have access to is the level of education which we spoke about previously. These are the things on a micro level we need to address, because those are the things that are going to empower people. And also, it's easy to forget that they were also used as a tool to prevent mass unemployment and that Great Depression style of collapse that happened back in 2008, which isn't that long ago. So yes, of course, with anything there are side effects. And one of those is asset inflation. That's a byproduct, that's almost a prerequisite. But blaming zero interest rates for inequality is like blaming antibiotics for antibiotic resistance. It's just a second order effect of something effectively saving the system. So the real solution isn't to stop crisis interventions, it's to pair them with structural reforms. Things like broader access to equity markets, that's a given. Portable retirement savings, being able to have that mobility with a pension. Housing supply expansion is huge. So let's use the same tools that they do, but just redirect them more fairly. So Gary's claim number 4 is wealth taxes versus an alternative minimum tax. So Gary says we need to redistribute through taxes. In a nutshell, preferably wealth taxes or aggressive inheritance taxes. Okay, now wealth taxes sounds great in theory. It's the whole Robin Hood kind of theory, rob from prosperity, give to poor. Okay, sounds cool, but the implementation challenges are real. They're real things. And we don't have to go into all of those. There's multiple loopholes that policies put in place for these. So practically, it's very hard. Go ask France, go ask Sweden. Very hard to do. So nations have tried this. It turns out most of the time you're going to collect less revenue than actually expected, which also will push wealth out of an economy. It's a byproduct in the form of people just leaving as well. So that's a multifaceted issue in itself. We're not a communist nation. We're not China. We haven't got the pull to sit people down and tell them exactly that they have to do this thing. The West is not China. We don't have capital controls like that in place. Our legal frameworks don't allow that to happen. We can't start rewiring everything to create this agenda. It's not practical. It's going to unravel so much other things. So I do believe a more practical solution would actually be kind of an alternative minimum tax for ultra high net worth individuals. And again, the issue is not paying tax. Again, I'm going to talk personally, and also hearing from people like billionaires who have said openly that paying tax isn't the issue. The issue is the funds that are gathered, the funds that are generated, this capital, where is it going? There's no evidence that it's going to great initiatives. And that's the issue I personally share as well. Because when I get to that level of paying ridiculous amounts of tax, I would want to know where it goes as well. And I'll be proud to know that my taxes contributed to said initiative, something that's really going to provide value to a community or an ecosystem. I'll be happy to contribute towards that. But just saying, because you are ultra successful, you're ultra net worth individual, you have to do this, doesn't make sense. Because why do I have to do this? Explain to me, show me what I'm getting for the money. Essentially, it's not about a return on investment, but it's a return on value. Like, where's this money going? So that's a more practical approach potentially. Okay, I'm not saying that's gospel. And also close the effective tax gap. Those 25 richest Americans are paying just 6% in taxes, which is absurd. It is crazy. But again, it does flow back to the point 1 we just made. Most of those people, they've openly said publicly that paying tax isn't the issue. It's where the money's going to be going. So that needs to be addressed first. And again, that's a micro issue. And then thirdly, on that point, what I'd probably suggest is maybe tying some of those, corporate tax rates towards domestic investment, and also kind of intensifying and strengthening that labor force. So I think these are more of a potential realistic reform that don't really require such drastic rewriting of global tax code. Now, point 5 of Gary's claims is the battle with the inevitability of the collapse. All right. And if redistribution is not put in place, then the collapse is imminent, basically. And he says, if we don't act, we're heading towards societal collapse, widespread poverty, asset dispossession, and instability. Now, I will say there's a real danger in overusing collapse narratives. Fear can motivate, yes, it can, but also it tends to paralyze. And especially among young people. And I think this is what we're seeing right now. I'm seeing it right now. And I think the two are correlated. And it's definitely an affecting factor to why young people are feeling so paralyzed right now. Because again, it goes back to those micro systems that we need to address. It's education. People don't know what direction to take. And when you don't know what direction to take, what do? You tend to do nothing and you stand still. And then someone comes along and gives you a doomsday theory, and without any real practical solutions. And yes, it sounds cool because most people, what do they want to do? Most people want to be part of something. Most people want to feel like they are a part of some kind of movement, forward movement. And I think this is what this does. You know, rallying together, saying the rich need to do more, the rich need to give us this. Of course you're going to create a crowd. You know, most people will join that crowd. But when you join that crowd and you start realizing that you're just part of a crowd, you're not actually making forward movement, because not all movement is progression. You realize that you haven't got tangible, practical solutions. You realize that you're actually not part of a group. You're all individually just standing together. So this is where it gets dangerous, because if you're implying that collapse is imminent, to claim that you need to provide a solution. And yes, I understand the status quo isn't working. It hasn't been working for a very long time. Reform is required. But betting everything on these radical redistributions, or even implying that collapse is inevitable, ignores how resilient and adaptive and also creative people are these days. It's training people what to do when their back's against the wall. And what we need to do, and what we need to start learning, is that when our back's against the wall, we tear down the wall. Because it's so easy to forget, and revolutions are often romanticized in hindsight. But for most real progress, it came from institutional reform. When you look back at the data, civic movements, innovation, and political evolution, not collapse. So we come to the part in the video where you're probably wondering, so what do we do? What should we do? And I'm going to propose 5 high impact solutions to address inequality and potentially rebuild a strong modern middle class without triggering chaos or relying on impossible political consensuses. So I wrote a few things down because I didn't want to skip anything. I thought about these, and we're going to go through them and let me know what you think about them. So the first thing I would probably propose is some kind of universal basic asset. UBA, if you will, instead of UBI. So instead of giving people cash handouts with universal basic income, let's create a system where we can provide, let's say, every 18-year-old with a trust for either education, housing, or a business. Let the public share in national wealth, not just be consumers of it and be destitute of consumption. That's not a great way to build an economy, especially the middle class, because the middle class is the most important. That's how an economy thrives. Now, next up, I'd like to suggest some form of digital equity participation. And this will come in the form of requiring public companies to distribute some shares to their workers, in the form of equity funds. Okay? So I believe if you do work for a company, public company particularly, you should benefit from some of their success because you are actively a cog in the engine. You're a part of the system. You're contributing to that prosperity. So compensation in the form of some ownership, because that's what equity is, should be on the cards for you. I believe that should be a prerequisite of you building a company up, for sure. Number 3, I'd like to see a smarter inheritance reform. I think that needs to be definitely looked at. And again, could come in many different forms. Potentially capping lifetime tax-free inheritances. Not just per estate. Maybe looking at taxing intergenerational wealth, but let that little guy survive. Let the small business succession survive. I think that's very important to an ecosystem. Not attacking, not putting a blanket over it. Looking at it again on a micro level. Number 4, probably the most important on the list for me, is looking at the housing supply stock. Start looking at densifying cities, maybe legalizing multifamily homes in suburban areas, but making housing a utility, not an investment. Because it pains me that residential real estate is such an investment when it should just be a utility, especially in a first world nation the way we are. I'm not saying people should be given handouts and things are fair. That's not what I'm saying. There is a fine line. But housing is a utility. It shouldn't be an investment. It should be commercial only, not residential. That should be utility, especially in a nation as developed as we are. And the last point I'd like to make is maybe looking at more dynamic labour protections, especially when people are moving jobs. The security shouldn't come with the job. The security should go with the worker. Having that mobility and that agility to offer and move benefits in between workplace. And maybe offering portable benefits for the freelancer or the contract workers. Those are also people who contribute to the economy. So promoting those things. The gig economy is hugely growing right now. So I think having those dynamic kind of abilities that protect those people who aren't set in stone with full-time employment, because many aren't, I think those need protections as well. And those are things that we can look at on a micro level, I believe. So look, at the end of the day, Gary, he's not wrong about the danger. He's not. But urgency without actionable nuance can lead us to dead ends. And I think that's what will happen if solutions and debates with like-minded individuals are not had on a political level and economic level. It's not about us choosing between elitism or revolution. We need reform that's bold enough to matter, but realistic enough to pass. That starts with building the awareness to it, having those conversations, and that I do agree with him on. So, also building coalitions, building collaborations to craft policy and start regaining public trust inside of these institutions. The middle class won't rebuild itself, but it doesn't require collapse in order to reform. So let's get to work as a collective before it is too late and before we mistake financial despair for inevitability. So thanks for watching. If you like this kind of constructive breakdown, let me know in the comments, and also let me know if you agree or disagree with me or Gary, and I want to hear your take. I'm interested. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this out if you think people need to hear a more balanced conversation on the future of our economy. Until next time, I'll see you then.